Even the other prisoners would say, "That's the kind of man who belongs behind bars." Some people just seem incapable of functioning anywhere else. He must have either been damn good at his criminal behavior on the outside or just suddenly snapped out of nowhere, because his record was spotless before he found himself serving a life sentence in a state prison. He didn't even have a speeding ticket on his record when he was found guilty of murder. People say that your true colors show when you're backed into a corner with no other options. If that's true, then locking a man between four corners of stone and steel for the rest of his foreseeable life must be the ultimate truth serum. You'd be hard-pressed to find a man throughout history so adamant about his own innocence when he was on trial. His eyes seemed to scream with sincerity as he pleaded, but those eyes looked completely different by the time his shackled body took its first steps into his new home. People talk about the importance of establishing yourself in the pecking order on your first day in prison. They say you should do something crazy to give the rest of the residents, including those who rode in with you, something to fear, unless you wanted to be the one giving up lunchroom rations and communal shower intimacy. He wasted no time giving his new peers something to fear. He was accustomed to receiving an ugly hand of cards, and prison seemed like no place to get caught bluffing. He didn't pick a fight with a big inmate or chew on his plastic food tray as some inmates did to get the tone set for their toughness or alleged insanity. His first hour in the cell block, the man with zero criminal record outside of the murder count that landed him there delivered an unprovoked punch to the face of the first guard who came within arm's length. It evoked a chilling laughter from deep within the new inmate's gullet that echoed off the steel and concrete of every cell in the entire time that he was dragged to the solitary confinement, where he spent his first night in abject silence. He wasn't a daily picture of instability, but he provided ample evidence for his peers to understand that his opening act was no fluke. He knew that this was his life now. He hadn't been convicted of just murder, but that of a child. April 21st, 2002, he walked into a park near his Chicago home, the same park from which a 10-year-old boy would never walk away. Local police found him at the scene moments after the chilling scream with warm blood dripping from his hands. He wasn't getting parole. He wasn't getting a reduced sentence if he behaved himself. He wasn't going to see life outside these walls again. He quickly concluded it best to make his remaining time alive as comfortable as possible, like a terminal cancer patient waiting for his final breath. Unfortunately, he couldn't achieve maximum prison comfort by making friends with everyone. He wasn't going to win a popularity contest in the pen. Even if he were the most likable person on the block, some would hate him because of how obnoxiously likable he'd be. Others would hate him because of the other people who liked him. Some would hate him just for the fakeness of trying too hard. He could be as respectful and reasonable as he wanted, but he wasn't dealing with respectful and reasonable people, so there was no point running for mayor behind bars. He knew that his best chance was to give people a reason to keep their distance, make the risk of spiting him higher than the potential reward. The trouble was that while some things were like clockwork in prison, making it an extremely predictable place, the human element was so unstable that other parts were deeply unpredictable. No matter how well he played the odds, they were still odds. Professional mathematicians and gamblers will agree that there are no absolute guarantees when playing with probability. What people don't talk about as often is that it's insufficient just to make a strong first impression on your first day in prison. Right when all the cats think they know the score, a busload of new kittens gets dropped into the mix and the whole game starts again. You might spend a decade in the same block, never talking directly to someone, but constantly proving to him that he's better off not to challenge you. Then one day that man could have the nerve to get parole and be replaced by some punk who's never even seen you before. 13 years after his child murder sentence began, a new inmate decided to do some impression-making of his own. By then, his prison record read like a colorful novella. He'd been in just about every kind of scrap with inmates and guards in nearly every place the grounds had to offer. It was about more than just proving his toughness. Fights and other infractions were a great way of breaking up the maddening monotony of waking up every day just to exist until you slip back into unconsciousness. He had no visitors. His friends and family who loved him so much during his freedom could not bear the notion that the best among them could have stabbed a 7-year-old to death in the park and be found with literal blood on his hands. Just as nobody on the inside would have recognized him by his civilian criminal record or lack thereof, nobody on the outside would have recognized him by his prison rap sheet. Whether his personality had been transformed or exposed, the process was well past completion by year 13. If enough people tell you you're a monster and treat you like a monster, it should come as no surprise when you engage in monstrous activity, especially when locked up. Some say monsters exist to be slain by heroes, but it turns out there's nothing in the rule book that says a younger monster with a shiv can't also take a crack at it. He never even attempted eye contact with the 22-year-old, who certainly didn't bother to look him in the eye as he lodged the sharpened scrap of plastic between the older man's ribs. It was evident that the kid on the delivering end of the shiv wasn't locked up for murder, and it seemed he didn't realize that it didn't work like it does in the movies or in video games. Even a critical stab wound like this one, which seemed to puncture the lung, wasn't instantly fatal. The kid didn't know what hit him when his victim spun around in a fit of agony with his sturdy fist cracking the assailant hard across his young jaw, sending them both to the grimy concrete slab of the exercise yard. It wouldn't be the first time they would have to hose the victim's blood from the slab, but it would be the last. Over a decade he'd spent proving himself to deter potential threats, and it ultimately only served to make him the ideal target for someone else attempting to do the exact same thing. But the tragedy of this fallen prisoner's story does not end with irony alone. His cold body had not yet left the infirmary when the warden received the call. A recent bloody path of butchered children led the detectives to the arrest of a killer. Court hearings had not yet commenced, but the defendant was expected to plead guilty, having already confessed to a long string of vile transgressions, including one in a Chicago park on April 21st, 2002.